Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with world traveler and podcaster Gary Arndt. He is an award-winning travel photographer and the host of Everything Everywhere, a daily podcast that gets over 1 million monthly downloads. His travels have taken him to over 130 countries, and he has also visited over 400 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in all 50 states, twice. His blog, Everything Everywhere, was named one of the top 25 blogs in the world by Time magazine, and it earned a gold medal in the travel blog category in the North American Travel Journalists Association Awards. He is one of the most awarded travel photographers of this decade. He is very decorated, full of stories. Enjoy the interview.
Hi, Gary. It's Joe Dimino.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you today?
I'm doing good.
Good. Great to meet you. Thanks for taking a minute out for the show.
Yeah, no problem.
Before we get into your life and work and kind of what makes you move and makes you who you are, I want to know, the last 3 years with COVID was quite a thing. How did you survive that time period, and how has it changed the way that you do things now?
Oh, it radically changed it. The biggest thing is, well, what happened is I got back from my last international trip on February 28th, 2020. The moment I get home, I get COVID. And then in the weeks preceding that, pretty much everything I had going in my business fell apart. The entire travel and tourism industry worldwide basically collapsed. And I initially thought that it would recover within a few weeks, and as we found out, that wasn't the case. And so I ended up doing a very big pivot away from photography and blogging, and I launched a podcast in July of 2020. And I've been doing that ever since. And it turned out to be far better than what I was doing before. So it actually worked out for the best.
So let's really get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis. If you were in front of a bunch of third graders at a career day and one of the kids looked up and said, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" how would you answer that child?
I create a podcast, and every day is about something different where you can learn about something brand new. So just 1 minute before you called me, I was finishing up today's episode on the Mayan civilization.
So are you back to traveling at all? Are you doing anything that you were doing before?
Not really. I haven't left the country since the pandemic started. And the podcast is so successful that I'm kind of putting all of my effort into this. It's at a point now where it's getting over 1 million downloads a month, and the audience is growing rapidly. So I want to keep doing that, and I may travel again, but it'll be different than how I did it in the past.
So let's get to how you got this bug for travel and a thirst for seeing the world. What did you want to be when you were in the third grade? What was your dream growing up?
Oh, probably an astronaut. I was pretty fascinated by the space program. I would always read things about that. And my dad had a subscription to National Geographic. I was a very early reader. I could read. I taught myself how to read before kindergarten. I was very voracious. And I would often read my dad's National Geographics and look at the photos of all the places around the world. And my family never really traveled much. We were not very wealthy. But I always wanted to do that. And so when I finally had the ability to do it, I went and did it.
What was the first big trip that you took that really left a mark that made you want to continue to do it?
In the 90s, I started a very early internet company, and I sold it in 1998. And I sold it to a large international company. And one of the things I did was I convinced them to send me on a trip around the world to all their offices to talk to them about internet development. So in January of 1999, I went on a trip, and I went to Tokyo, Taipei, Singapore, Frankfurt, London, Paris, Brussels. It was a whirlwind 3-week trip, circumnavigated the globe. And that was the first time that I had ever really been anywhere like that. And it was a very eye-opening experience. And after that, I took a brief trip to Iceland. I did a trip when I went back to school as part of a research team that went to Argentina. And it was there that I kind of got the idea that, I could just sell my house and travel around the world for a while. And so in 2005, I announced to everyone that's what I was going to do. And in March of 2007, I tied up all the loose ends, sold my house, and set out to travel.
So what did you learn? What was the thing that you learned the most about being able to be in a position to see so many cultures, so many societies, so many different people?
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, overall, I mean, you have a benefit. I mean, I'm in Kansas City, and I drive through some of these Kansas small towns, and I'm like, my God, these people haven't seen anything. There's no, and you'll hear people that haven't traveled their whole lives. They've been landlocked. But you've had the fortunate opportunity to see so many different societies and cultures and humans and the way that we commingle, and how does that play on you? How has that been beneficial for the way that you view life and live your own life?
Well, it's been incredibly rewarding. You know, I've been able to see and do more than 99.99% of all the humans that ever existed. I've seen more of the planet. I've been to every continent. I've, been in the water with great white sharks. I've been launched from a nuclear aircraft carrier, dog sledding, you name it. The world's a very big place. I think everybody, at the end of the day, pretty much wants the same things in life. Most people go about their business and their daily lives the same all over the world. What they eat and things like that may be different, but I think that despite all their differences, there's a definite commonality that everyone on the planet shares.
So who's been a hero for you in your life? Who have you really looked up to? Who's been an inspiration?
I don't have a lot necessarily. I mean, one person I always looked up to and that I always admired was Ted Williams, the baseball player, simply because his approach to doing something as simple as hitting a baseball, he took quite serious, and he gave it a lot of thought. And I think that anybody that, no matter what it is, whether it's music or art or science or construction or whatever it may be, I'm always rather impressed and admire anybody who takes what they do very seriously and gives it a great deal of thought.
So speaking of someone like Ted Williams, if you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now, who would it be? Who would you love to meet and talk to?
The composer Philip Glass. I've always been a great admirer of his work. I think he's like 85 or 86 years old. And he's also traveled quite extensively, and I think he would just be a very interesting guy to meet. He's one of the few people. For the most part, I'm not a great big hero worshiper. I think people should always, for the most part, look to themselves whenever possible. And, the number of people that you should look up to should be pretty small, and you should always try to focus on improving yourself rather than engaging in hero worship.
I've been a big fan of Philip Glass. They made a documentary about him. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, I've seen pretty much everything ever created about him, all the interviews. I own pretty much every recording he's ever made. Yeah,
he's amazing. So obviously with someone like Philip Glass, who's highly motivated, and you are as well, what is that motivation for you? What is the spark for you to do what you do and to have this thirst for getting things done?
Well, for what I do in terms of traveling and now in the creation of my podcast, it all has to do with learning. I think that's where it all stems from. People ask me why I wanted to travel, and it was really to learn about different places. Everywhere you went, you'd learn about things that you didn't even know that you didn't know. And, I do a daily podcast now, and it's kind of the same thing. Every day I'm writing a 2,000-word script, basically a term paper, and the subjects are highly eclectic, and I get to introduce people to things that they didn't even know that they didn't know. And I think learning, a lot of people think of learning as something that you do in school or in a classroom or something you do as a child. And I think it's a lifelong pursuit that you need to do every day.
What was the one thing that you've seen in your travels that was surprising, you didn't expect it? Maybe a geographical place in the world or something that happened there? What was one of the more surprising things that you've actually seen firsthand?
Oh boy. A lot of it isn't necessarily surprising if you do your homework. I think one of the biggest things would be a lot of what people think they know about the rest of the world is based on what they see on television, what the media or the news will tell them. And I've been in several situations around the world that were newsworthy events, and I subsequently followed how that story developed online. And one of the things that I found very shocking was how poor the reporting was, and how they would often report something for the sole purpose of dramatizing what was happening. So I was in Thailand in 2010 during some big protests that were going on, and I watched a news crew do a story. And, you know, the news crew, there's people walking around, it's just a regular day on the street, but the person on camera was wearing a helmet and otherwise looking, he was in a war zone. And it was something I thought very deceptive, because that wasn't, you know, the cameramen were not dressed like this. Nobody around them was dressed like this. It was just the guy on camera, and he was trying to convey a particular image. And I've seen similar things like that all over the world, where the reporting is just kind of shoddy. People then develop beliefs and views about the rest of the world based on what they see that are often false. And, you know, I've experienced this as well. I've traveled all over the Arab world, and I've received nothing but hospitality. When I tell people that, they often say, oh, it was so dangerous. I'm like, no. And they just, because their views of what that part of the world is created by the media. And as a result, a lot of people are afraid to travel. They hear of one story of one woman who was murdered in a place, and they now think that, oh, the entire place is dangerous. Yet if a murder happens a few blocks from where you live, you would never think to sell your house and move, because you're just used to it. But we paint the rest of the world with a very broad brush. And so I think that's one of the things that's surprising, is just how much most people don't know about the rest of the world.
So of all the things you've done in your life so far, what are you the proudest of?
Oh, I think I've become a pretty good photographer, having known absolutely nothing when I started. I literally purchased a camera that was far too expensive, thinking that it would take good photos. And I very quickly found out that that's not how it works. You can take very bad photos with a very nice camera. And then I spent the next several years traveling, very slowly, developing my skills as a photographer, to the point where I eventually was named Travel Photographer of the Year 3 times in North America.
So let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into a 20-year-old version of yourself, and you could give a younger version of you a piece of advice based on the life you've led, the wisdom you've gained. What would you tell that young version of yourself?
Buy stock in Apple.
Right on. What's your favorite subject matter to take pictures of? I mean, there's things that you do professionally, and there's a wide palette, but what's one of your preferences?
I'm a very opportunistic photographer. I've taken photos of wildlife, people, landscapes. It really depends. So I'm trying to photograph the place, not any sort of particular thing. And whatever opportunities arise, I'm happy to take pictures of it. Where I'm standing at this very moment talking to you, I have a landscape photo of some lightning I took over Canada, a picture of fjords. I'm looking at one of Petra at night, woman standing in front of a waterfall in the Caribbean. There's all sorts of them. I don't really go out of my way for any particular type of photo. Basically, I think good photography at its simplest is just putting yourself in front of beautiful things and knowing how your camera works.
So, Gary, everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm someone who pretty much does my own thing. So very early on, I was the first person from my family to go to college. There's a lot of things I did that no one in my family did. I started a business. So when I eventually got to the point where I announced that I was traveling around the world, there was no debate or discussion. It was just like, okay, that's the next thing he's going to do. And that's kind of what I did. So I think I'm someone who does what I enjoy. I'm not one of these people who regrets, not having done things. And I kind of like to live life by my own rules.
So, Gary, if anyone wants to listen to your podcast, see your work, delve into your world any further, where's the best place for them to go?
Wherever you're listening to this podcast right now, just search for Everything Everywhere Daily. And every day, you'll learn something new.
Wonderful. I know I have on this episode that we've done here. Gary, thank you so much for opening up. Thanks for unfolding your fascinating world. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, travel, music, and more from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.